notice. Can I just go to an issue back again, back on the 22nd of February 2000, the ATSB made a recommendation to the Bureau of Meteorology about aviation safety issues and actions in terms of the reliability of Norfolk Island forecasts. Are you familiar with that at all?
No, I'm not, Senator.
Okay. Perhaps if you could take that on notice, but it talks about a safety deficiency and the unreliability of the weather forecasts at Norfolk Island.
Sorry, so that's a recommendation to BOM?
Yeah, to the Bureau of Meteorology, okay. Yes, but it does actually make reference a safety action. As a result of these occurrences, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority has commenced a project to review the fuel requirements for flights to remote islands. Report on Norfolk Island, recommendation to the Bureau of Meteorology, and the safety action is that CASA had commenced a project to review the fuel requirements for flights to remote islands. And I presume that was, can you tell me when that was concluded, that review?
We do have a project on to...
No, this is back in... No, perhaps you're mistaken me. This is back on the 22nd of February 2000, saying that a recommendation was issued to the Bureau of Meteorology and a safety action, there was analysis. It said that the present level of reliability of meteorological forecasts and the current regulatory requirements are not providing an adequate level of safety for passenger carrying services to Norfolk Island. Therefore, that was the analysis. The safety action was, as a result of these occurrences, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority has commenced a project to review the fuel requirements for flights to remote islands. Now, that was nearly 12 years ago. What's happened, sorry, more than 12 years ago. What's happened since then?
Well, Senator, I can't speak of what the then regime did 12 years ago with those recommendations.
But you can tell me, surely CASA obviously dealt with this pretty promptly. It was back in 2000. When was the review in relation to the fuel requirements for flights to remote islands concluded by CASA?
Senator, as far as that report goes and the recommendation and what the disposition of is, we'll have to take that on notice. None of us were involved, unfortunately, in the year 2000. There is a project involved at the moment in fuel for remote islands.
Surely it can't be the same project, Mr McCormack. Surely it can't be the same project from a recommendation issued on the 22nd of February 2000. It can't be.
Well, I don't. That's the first I've heard of that recommendation, Senator, myself personally, so I don't connect the two. But as I said, we'll take on notice that particular report. I reckon
we're going to have you back here because it relates to a number of incidents in relation to a BA British Aerospace 146 aircraft, a Piper Navharp Chieftain, another BA 146. It gives a number of instances where things got pretty hairy because of the unreliability of weather forecasts at Norfolk Island. CASA was undertaking a review in relation to fuel requirements for flights to remote islands. This is over 12 years ago. Yes, surely it's been resolved. It must be. Please don't tell me that there's still an ongoing review of fuel requirements to remote islands 12 years after it was raised, nearly 13 years rather after it was raised.
Senator, I appreciate what you've raised there is that people should be very prudent when they're flight planning to Norfolk Island.
No, Mr. McCormack, I'm sorry, Mr. McCormack. There was a role for CASA to take. The Civil Aviation Safety Authority has commenced a project to review the fuel requirements for flights to remote islands. Can anyone at this table please tell me what the review involved? When was that review concluded?
Senator, sorry, we weren't involved. We weren't involved in this. We weren't in these positions in the year 2000. I don't know what's happened to that report. I will find it out on notice.
Does that speak to a broader issue, though, Mr. McCormack, that there's no closed-loop system, so that recommendations that are made by ATSB that CASA agrees, and particularly we've seen a number where in a coroner's court, the coroner has said we'll close out this issue because ATSB have made a recommendation, CASA said they'll do it, and then a decade later there's been no action. Is that an issue for the travelling public that... You know, and I hear, you weren't there for that whole 10 years, but we're talking about a system now, not personalities. Is the system not working as it should?
Well, Senator, again, as I say, I can't speak for what happened in 2000. I only got here in 2009. But we have in place a system now where we do track all the recommendations. Since 2009 and on hand, at the moment, there's 121 recommendations been made by coroners. There are 16 of those outstanding. Some of them, unfortunately, are beyond our ability to do. The coroner's made quite a good... she may have made quite a reasonable finding, but it's impossible for us to implement. Some others we have under review as well. We do have the safety recommendations and the recommendations of the ATSB, and we do track those. We've been doing that since I've been here, and we know exactly how many of those are outstanding as well.
Okay.
Was anybody at the table employed by CASA in 2000?
Mr Boyd, were you around?
Anyone?
Yes, but not in that
Mr. Boyd,
position.
you were?
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Dr Alec?
And Mr. Farquharson and Mr. Alec?
I was in Montreal.
Okay, you got an
Nobody's
alibi.
got.
But going to the terms of reference here, though, looking at an ATSB report, and again, this is what we're looking at, an ATSB
Yes,
report
sure, understood.
into this incident at Norfolk Island, here are two regulatory issues, one to do with the categorisation of aeromedical flights, and that should have been upgraded to charter so there was more protection granted. That didn't occur. And one that we should be more prescriptive about fuel requirements for remote islands. Now, I understand PelAir's actually implemented that post your special audit, and I understand CASA has undertaken again to look at that issue, both of which point to the fact that here is a regulatory issue that if implemented 10 years ago, either of those, this accident probably wouldn't have happened. Now, as the regulator, don't you think that the ATSB report should have covered those factors? I know it's not for you to tell them how to do their report, but you're the regulator. Should they have not considered those broader regulatory issues as part of this report? Are you surprised they didn't?
Well, I think, and someone may have said it earlier on, we didn't get to hear all the testimony, but I think the more that's in an accident report or an incident report, not to be used for punitive measures, but information which informs people of background of what's happened, what some of the other factors are, even if they have no or little real bearing on the outcome, I think that's all to the good. That's a move to the good. The more that's in the report, the better. Now, that's my personal view. But I have no control, as we said, and I won't say it again. You know I'm going to say I have no control of what the ATSB puts in the report. But I think in the sharing of information, it should all be available. Now, in the particular case of remote island operations, there are 6 other operators conducting aeromedical evacuation flights after the PelAir ditching. We audited those 6. We went and looked to see what they were doing. None of those had an issue. Norfolk Island has been flown to for many years, by PelAir as well, in various iterations, without there being an issue. But it's a tricky place to fly to. I think we all agree that.
We took evidence this morning that 13% of the flights into Norfolk Island had a fuel critical issue when they got there.
From PelAir or in general?
In general.
General.
We would not have that information, Senator, unless
Well, we'll
it came
get it
to
to
us.
you.
Chair, can I just go back to this issue? And you know, I'll read the analysis to you of a report that is now almost 13 years old, the ATSB report. Analysis. Reports to the Bureau, including those detailed in the factual information section above, indicate that the actual weather conditions at Norfolk Island have not been reliably forecast on a number of occasions. Current regulations do not require pilots of regular public transport aircraft to carry fuel reserves other than those dictated by the forecast weather conditions. The safety consequences of an unforecast deterioration in the weather at an isolated aerodrome like Norfolk Island may be serious. The present levels of reliability of meteorological forecasts and the current regulatory requirements are not providing an adequate level of safety for passenger carrying services to Norfolk Island. Very serious matters were raised in that report, and it's is it fair to assume that in fact CASA has not after almost 13 years reviewed the fuel requirements to flights to remote islands?
Well, in actual fact, Senator, we have reviewed the fuel requirements to remote islands, but not Norfolk Island. We have reviewed them to Christmas Island in relation to some of the flights being conducted on behalf of the Australian government.
But not Norfolk Island.
Norfolk Island as an issue, as a specific issue, is now included, as you said earlier on, I think, or somebody said in the committee, on PelAir's list of remote island airfields, etc. The regular public transport that you're referring to there, of course, are carrying alternates if required and carrying contingency fuel required, which is the difference to aerial work. Aerial work, to put aeromedical evacuation to aerial work, you heard earlier on there was a policy about the classification of activities. The classification of activities policy was modified. It's in the front of our standards development. It's interesting to note that the comment at the time that policy came to me was that it was being produced not to reduce the risk in the aviation sector, it was to reduce the risk to CASA. And of course it relied on informed consent. Informed consent being that you knew what risks you were taking when you got on board an aircraft. Now, there's a difficulty in that from the point of view if we had the Royal Flying Doctor Service, for instance, in charter category, and you had informed consent, how could they pick up somebody from a road accident who was unconscious and then legitimately say they'd made informed consent to get on board the aircraft? There are significant issues around charter and aerial work. My personal view is there should be no difference between aerial work and charter when it comes to these matters. and public transport will disappear under its current guise in the new ops regulations. However, we have found no one else that's had difficulty with this. You know, this is an extraordinary set of circumstances where an aircraft that's otherwise serviceable is wound up in the water purely because it ran out of fuel. What we have in place in the far as the regulatory development to go, and again, I cannot talk to what happened in 2000, is to remove that anomaly, but we're also cognizant, as you said, of ICAO's requirements.
Let's not take it any further other than, on notice, can you please advise what action did CASA take following
we've got that
recommendations
on
made
notice.
on the 22nd of February 2000?